The grand tournament of unity came once every 10 years, and the whole world waited for it as if it were the heartbeat of the planet. The kings and queens of the human kingdoms sent their bravest men and women to fight for honor, peace, and the glory of their home. The arena was built in a shining city called Solmir, where marble towers touched the clouds and wide streets carried people from every land. It was said that whoever won the tournament would be remembered forever as the human champion, the symbol of what united all humankind. Adrian Cole did not think much about fame or glory. He was a soldier from the coastal guard, strong, fair, and quiet. His hair was the color of sand after a storm, and his eyes were sharp but kind. Many of his comrades joked that he belonged more to the waves than to the battlefield. When his commander told him that he had been chosen to fight in the tournament, Adrian tried to refuse. He said that heroes came from noble families, not from men who patched ships and guarded ports. But his commander only laughed and told him that skill and courage had no crown, and Adrian soon found himself on a journey to Solmir. The city was bright and overwhelming. People filled the roads like a sea of faces, shouting, selling, singing, and waving flags. All were human, yet every group looked slightly different. Some wore desert robes, others fine city coats, while soldiers from the northern lands had heavy boots and hard hands. It was the first time Adrian saw the great unity of humankind, and deep inside he felt small but proud to be part of it. The queen herself, Leora, ruled over all with calm grace. She was known to be wise beyond her years, a ruler who valued peace more than power and compassion more than fear. Her court loved her, though not all agreed with every law she made. On the morning of the first battle, she sat high on her golden seat above the arena, surrounded by her advisors and guards. Long silver cloak fell across the throne like flowing light. Adrian saw her from below and could not explain why the sight of her stilled his heart. She did not look cruel or proud. She looked human, real, like someone who carried the weight of many lives on her shoulders and still stood tall. The first matches were brutal. Fighters came from the mountains, deserts, forests, and great cities. Spears clashed, swords flashed, and the sound of cheering echoed like thunder. Adrian fought with skill but without showing off. He was fast, clever, and most of all, patient. When his first opponent charged too quickly, Adrian stepped aside and guided the man's momentum against him. The crowd gasped. He never smiled, but the judges nodded in approval. Round by round, his calm approach made him stand apart. On the fourth day, he faced one of the favorites, a prince from the Central Plains known for his pride. Before the fight, the prince sneered and called Adrian a peasant who did not deserve to touch the royal sand of the arena. Adrian said nothing. When the bell rang, the prince came at him like lightning. The fight was sharp and filled with danger, but Adrian's patience outlasted his opponent's pride. When he landed the final move that made the prince yield, the crowd exploded in cheers. Even Queen Leora's advisor leaned forward to whisper something in her ear, and for a second she smiled. That small smile reached Adrian's eyes, just as he looked up to catch his breath. It was only a short moment, but something inside him felt different, as if the world had shifted slightly. He lowered his head, unsure what the feeling was or why it mattered. By the time the final battle came, only two fighters were left, Adrian and Marina Vale, a knight from the Eastern Islands. She was strong, fast, and fearless, but she fought with joy, not anger. Their match lasted longer than any before. The audience went silent, except for the clash of weapons. Sweat mixed with dust, and their every move told a story of endurance and respect. When Marina finally stumbled, Adrian caught her before she fell. The bell rang. He had won. The queen rose from her throne, and the sound of cheers filled the air like a storm. She walked down the steps with slow grace, the crown light shining upon her. When she stood before Adrian, the noise became a hum of awe. Her voice was soft but clear when she spoke. She told the people that the true strength of humankind was not in nobility or force, but in courage that stands for all. Then she placed the laurel crown upon Adrian's head, sealing him as the grand champion. Adrian knelt, tired and humbled, the sand beneath him warm. For a heartbeat, she looked directly into his eyes, and time seemed to pause. It was a brief glance, but one that neither would forget. Something had begun quietly, unexpectedly, but powerfully. The tournament ended that day, but for Adrian and Queen Leora, the real story was only beginning. The celebration after the tournament lasted all night and filled every corner of the royal city. The air smelled of roasted meat and sweet fruit, and the sound of music rose high above the towers. In the streets, children danced around bright lights, and old men sang old songs of peace and victory. Inside the palace, the grand hall was filled with nobles, guards, servants, and guests from every land. Everyone wanted to see the new champion, Adrian Cole, the man who had won the tournament not with pride, but with patience and heart. Adrian stood among the crowd, dressed in clean silk borrowed from the palace wardrobe, though he felt strange wearing it. He was used to the rough fabric of a soldier, not the smooth, fine clothes of nobility. Many people came to him to shake his hand, clapping his back and praising his victory. He smiled kindly, but his mind was still wandering. He remembered every fight, every moment of fear, every roar of the crowd was all too big for him. The Queen Leora sat at the long table, surrounded by lords and advisors. Her calm presence made the hall quieter, even with hundreds of voices talking and laughing. She was not wearing her crown now. Her dark hair fell freely, and her dress shimmered like faint silver. At times, she looked across the hall, watching her people, her champion, her future. As the night deepened, the royal musicians began to play a slow tune. The sound of lutes and pipes floated through the air like a gentle breeze. Adrian stood near one of the marble pillars, holding a cup of wine, unsure whether to stay or leave. Then he heard a soft voice behind him. It was the queen herself. She asked if the champion was enjoying the celebration. Her tone was kind, not commanding. Adrian turned quickly, almost stumbling, and bowed too deeply. She laughed softly, telling him that he did not need to bow every 3 seconds. He felt his face turn warm. He replied that the music and food were wonderful, but that he was not used to such high company. She smiled and told him that she, too often, felt alone in large rooms. That made him lift his head. They began to talk quietly, standing on the balcony where the sound of the party faded. Leora asked about his home by the sea, and he told her of the waves, the smell of salt, and the simple life of guarding the coast. She spoke of her life in the palace, the meetings, and the endless lines of people asking for decisions. It was not a complaint, only a truth. The moon rose high, round, and bright. The city below them glowed like a blanket of stars. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence felt peaceful. Then the queen looked at him and said that she had watched his final match closely. She had seen how he caught his opponent instead of letting her fall. That one act, she said, spoke louder than any sword strike. It told her that he fought not for glory, but for honor. Adrian felt his chest tighten. He thanked her quietly. He wanted to say something else, but no words came. She turned to the sky. In that moment, without her crown or her guards, she looked almost like someone lost in thought, someone ordinary and kind. The wind brushed her hair across her face, and he forgot for a moment that she was the queen of all humankind. When the next toast was called from below, she invited him to share one last drink before sunrise. They returned to her private observatory above the hall. It was a small round room made of glass and gold, filled with the faint hum of the night wind. From there, the entire city could be seen, quiet now except for the flicker of distant flames. The servants had left, and it was just the two of them. They talked again, this time about dreams and fears. She spoke honestly, saying that being queen sometimes meant losing herself in duty. He told her that being a soldier meant risking everything without ever being remembered. They listened to each other not as ruler and subject, but as people who finally met someone who understood the same loneliness. As the hours passed, laughter turned into silence again. The stars dimmed slowly as dawn crept across the sky. They both realized the night had slipped away, leaving them standing very close, both uncertain of what they should do next. Their eyes met in the golden light of morning. Nothing was planned or expected, but in that quiet moment their closeness grew into something neither could stop. It was not grand or loud, it was simple, human, and real. When the first light of day touched the city, the queen looked away shyly, and Adrian lowered his head in respect. Outside, the bells of Solmere rang to welcome a new morning, but inside the observatory, time stood still. That dawn would be remembered not for crowns or victory, but for the quiet connection between a queen and a champion who had both found more than they ever went looking for. When the weeks passed after the night of celebration, the royal palace returned to its quiet rhythm of laws and meetings. The queen met her council each morning, spoke with envoys from distant lands, and listened to the endless words of advisors who wanted her attention. On the outside, life seemed calm and proper as always. But soft whispers began to travel through the halls, small at first and easy to ignore. Servants talked in corners. Guards looked at each other with questions in their eyes. Something was happening, they said, though no one dared to speak too loudly. The Queen, Leora, felt tired more often. She would rest her hands on the edge of her throne when she stood, and the color of her face grew paler day by day. Her closest lady-in-waiting, Mira, noticed the change and begged her to call for the royal physician. When the physician came, he bowed deeply and checked her gently, his face growing tense as he did. After he left, he spoke quietly to the chief advisor, who went at once to the queen's study. By the end of the afternoon, the truth was known behind closed doors. The queen was with child. For a long time she sat alone, her hands folded on her lap. The red light of sunset crossed the marble floor as she watched it without seeing. She had known it in her heart before anyone told her, but she had not wanted to believe it. She thought of that night in the observatory, the quiet laughter, the bright stars, and the honest warmth between her and Adrian. Now that single night had changed the entire path of her life and maybe the fate of the whole kingdom. The council gathered quickly. The elder advisors argued in tight voices. Some said the people would rejoice. Others said they would turn against her. A queen expecting a child without a marriage would cause unrest. The nobles would question her right to rule. One young advisor dared to ask who the father was. Her reply was simple and firm. She told him that the matter was private and would not change her duty as queen. Yet deep inside her heart, she worried about Adrian. She knew what would come if his name was revealed. Far away on the coast, Adrian had returned to his old duties. He trained new guards, walked the shores, and tried to return to a life of peace. But everything felt different now. He missed the city lights, the music, and most of all, the quiet strength in Queen Leora's eyes. One gray morning, a messenger arrived from Solmir. The letter he carried spoke only a few words, but those words struck Adrian harder than any blade. The queen was ill, it said. The council summoned him to the capital. It was a long journey back, and during every mile his mind filled with restless thoughts. When he reached the palace gates, the guards allowed him through at once. Inside, the queen waited in her private garden surrounded by white roses. She looked both beautiful and weary. She saw him. Her eyes softened with relief. They stood silently for a moment before she asked if he had heard the talk. He nodded. She told him that the rumors were true. Adrian felt the ground shift beneath him. He dropped to one knee, not out of guilt, but from the weight of what he felt. He told her that he would take any punishment she wished, even banishment or death. But she laughed softly and shook her head. She said there would be no punishment. She placed her hand on his shoulder and told him that what had happened was not a crime. It was life unexpected but real. Still, they both knew the danger ahead. The nobles would seek reasons to remove her. They would speak of duty and tradition. Adrian, being a common soldier, would be painted as a man who reached too high. She would be called reckless, even sinful. The council prepared speeches to calm the people, but the queen stopped them. She told them that she would speak to the citizens herself. That night, she stood upon the balcony facing the great square of Solmir. Thousands of people filled the streets, holding candles that looked like stars in the darkness. Her voice carried clear and brave across the wind. She told them that a new life was growing in her womb, a child who would one day serve them all. He promised he would guard her and the child with everything he had, and together, they watched from the window as the people below lit more candles, covering the city with light like a sea of hope spreading into the night. The months that followed the queen's speech changed everything in the kingdom. For the first time in years, the people looked at their ruler not as a faraway figure, but as a living person with a heart like their own. Many whispered that the coming child was a blessing, a sign of hope after so many cold winters and wars. But not all were pleased. In gold-decorated halls and behind closed doors, some noble families gathered and spoke in low voices. They called the unborn child a danger to the crown. They said a royal bloodline should remain pure and untouched by common birth. Adrian returned to the palace as captain of the royal guard. The queen herself had requested his presence. When he arrived, he wore no fine clothes, only the armor of a soldier, because he wished no special favors. He had one purpose now, to protect the queen and the child she carried. The soldiers respected him, for he had been one of them before his victory in the tournament. The nobles, however, could barely hide their disdain. They saw him as a man who did not know his place. One quiet evening, Queen Leora sat with him in her study. The firelight made her eyes warm, though she looked tired. She told him about the letters from the distant provinces, some filled with love, others filled with threats. Adrian said that people often fear what they cannot understand. She smiled and thanked him for his calmness. Then she said that sometimes even a queen needs someone to remind her of hope. Outside, storms rolled across the land. Rumors spread that a group of lords was planning to take power while claiming to protect the throne. Adrian learned about their secret meetings through his soldiers. He went to the queen and asked her permission to act. She looked at him for a long moment and said that violence must be the last choice, not the first. Still, she trusted him to keep her safe. One dark night, the gates of Solmir shook. The rebel lords sent their soldiers to march on the capital. The bells rang, and the people woke in fear. But before panic could spread, Adrian was already on the outer walls, commanding his men. His voice was steady as he gave orders. He told them to hold the line, not for gold or titles, but for the peace of humankind. The queen stood at her window in the palace tower, watching the fires in the distance, praying that the dawn would come without tragedy. The fight was fierce but short. The rebels had numbers, but they lacked unity. Adrian's soldiers fought with discipline, using every small space to their advantage. He led from the front, sword flashing in the glow of torches. When one of the rebelling lords called out his name, mocking him as a peasant who dared to stand beside a queen, Adrian only replied, "Courage does not ask for permission." Then he charged forward and broke their line. By morning, the city was safe. The queen came down from the tower to meet the soldiers in the courtyard. She walked among them, thanking each one who had defended the kingdom. When she saw Adrian, her face was filled with pride. She told everyone that the champion had once again proven his loyalty, not with words but with action. The crowd cheered his name, and even the nobles who had doubted him bowed their heads. After the battle, the queen called for a feast to honor those who had protected the peace. It was not a grand celebration like the tournament. It was smaller, calmer, but more meaningful. She stood beside Adrian and raised her glass. Her words were simple. She said the crown alone did not make one noble, and that bravery, kindness, and honesty were the true pillars of the realm. The people applauded until their hands ached. As weeks turned into months, the wounds of war began to heal. The nobles who had plotted against the queen were sent far away to live under watch. The city grew bright again, and trade returned. Adrian remained by her side not just as her guard, but as her most trusted companion. He no longer felt unsure of his place. He belonged where she was. One evening, as the sun set over the shining roofs of Solmir, the queen walked with Adrian through the royal gardens. She was carrying her child now with clear joy. The air smelled of blooming roses, and the city below buzzed with calm life. She said softly that peace had returned because of the courage of ordinary people. Adrian looked at her and answered that peace would last only if rulers remembered who they served. Their eyes met, full of affection and respect. In that moment, neither crown nor armor mattered. They were simply two souls united by loyalty and a quiet kind of love, born not from desire, but from shared storms, shared courage, and shared hope. The queen smiled faintly, resting her hand over her growing child, said that the next chapter of their lives would belong not to her or to him, but to the future they had created together. The city bells rang gently in the evening light. Echoing through the gardens and over the walls, a sound of promise after all the noise of fear. The queen returned to the palace, and Adrian followed close behind, his heart calm for the first time in many months. The long winter finally ended, and the city of Solmir awoke to a new spring. The palace gardens were heavy with the scent of flowers, and soft winds carried laughter from the streets. The people had been waiting for this moment since the queen's speech many months ago. They spoke of blessings and hope. Everywhere there were bright flags and shining lights because a royal child was about to be born. Adrian walked the palace halls with quiet steps, his armor polished but his heart restless. Every sound of footsteps or faraway voices made him stop and turn. He had faced battles and storms, yet nothing had frightened him like this, waiting. Inside the royal chamber, Queen Leora was in the care of trusted women while the royal physicians stood by. Outside in the courtyard, hundreds of citizens knelt in prayer for their queen and her child. The night was long, but when dawn came, the sound of a baby's first cry filled the palace. The queen's child had come into the world, healthy and strong. The people called the baby the Dawn Heir, because sunlight touched the city at the same moment the child opened its eyes. When the queen held the baby for the first time, her tired face glowed with peace. She whispered a few gentle words of promise, telling her child that it would grow in a world built on hope, not fear. Later that day, Adrian was allowed to enter the chamber. He stopped near the door, unsure whether he should speak or bow. But Leora smiled and motioned for him to come closer. She placed the baby in his arms. He looked down at the small face, eyes closed, mouth soft, hands curled. For a man who had faced soldiers and chaos, he found himself trembling in silence. He asked quietly if the child was well, and she nodded. Her voice was weak, but each word was full of warmth. She told him that their child would know courage from him and kindness from her, and that these two gifts would guide the future. Outside, joy filled the city like a song made of sunlight. Bells rang for hours and people danced in the streets. Soldiers lined the palace walls, their faces proud. For once, nobility and commoners shared the same happiness. The council issued a proclamation saying the royal heir would be raised by the queen, but also under the wisdom of those who had served the people, including Adrian. It was the queen's wish that her child understand every part of society. Time passed gently. The child grew quickly and began to laugh, a sound that brightened the heart of everyone in the palace. Adrian trained the guards, but often stopped to visit the nursery. The child would reach out its small hands when it saw him, and Leora would tease him lightly, saying that the royal heir liked soldiers more than crowns. Adrian would smile and reply that the child had already learned what mattered most in life. Years later, stories of that time spread beyond the city. Travelers spoke of a queen who ruled with fairness and wisdom, and a champion who had stood by her side through danger and peace. Children played games pretending to be Adrian defending the throne, or the queen calming the people with her strong voice. The tale of how their destiny began by accident became a legend that inspired, not one that shamed. People no longer whispered. They told the story with pride. In the quiet evenings after the council meetings ended and the palace lights grew softer, Queen Leora would walk with Adrian in the garden. Their child, now old enough to run, would chase butterflies among the flowers. Leora would watch and say the world seemed lighter now. Adrian would agree, though he knew the peace they enjoyed had come from years of struggle. Each time he looked at her, he still felt that same awe he had felt the first day he stood before her in the arena. The queen often reminded her advisors that the strength of their people did not come from bloodlines or titles, but from courage and kindness. She made schools where children from every background could learn together. She opened the palace gates on certain days so that any citizen could speak to her directly. Adrian supported her in every step, keeping order, but also guiding the guards to serve with compassion. When the Dawn Heir grew older and began to learn the duties of leadership, Adrian trained the young one personally, teaching discipline and empathy, while Leora taught wisdom and patience. Together they watched their child become what both of them had once only dreamed to be, the bridge between all people. Many years later, when the gray of age touched their hair, Queen Leora and Adrian stood once again on the same balcony where they had once watched the stars. Below them, the city glowed with quiet life. Walls strong, streets bright, voices cheerful. Far from chaos, far from fear, The wind carried the songs of the people, and the two of them shared a smile that said more than words could. They had walked through risk and judgment, faced doubt and battle, and still stood together stronger than before. What had begun as a mistake in the eyes of many had turned into the heart of a new age. The kingdom of humans had entered an era of peace, unlike any other. Their story was whispered to every generation after them, not as a scandal, but as a reminder that even the smallest, most unexpected moment of love can change the shape of the world. In the soft glow of that final sunset, Queen Leora rested her hand in Adrian's. The bells of Salmir rang once more, not for war, not for ceremony, but for gratitude, for the champion, for the queen, and for the child of hope who had brought humankind together.